There's a lot to talk about in the state of Indiana across the board, but the thing that's most notable to me, what jumps out right away, the first thing that I think about when I think about this past weekend, it's of course the Colts losing to the Broncos 31-13 and effectively losing their playoff hopes. Right away, the immediate thought that comes to my mind, the immediate narrative, is that this was obviously a horrific showing, especially in the second half, and it exposed just about all of the flaws that this team maybe has. It was a massive moment with major consequences. The biggest game of the year, the biggest game the Colts have played since Week 18 last year against the Texans when they fell short in that winning play-in, effectively a playoff play-in game in the last week of the year. And the team fell flat again. And at least against the Texans, it felt like they had some fight. But in this game, on a Sunday on the road, couldn't get it done. It was poor coaching. It was poor quarterback play. It was poor performance across the board. But that's the bright side, is that at least we know how bad we are and we know where the problems lie. At least we know where the issues are. And like I said, it seems like the Broncos really exposed just about everything they could possibly expose in this game. Anthony Richardson was 17 for 38 for 172 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Jonathan Taylor had 22 carries for 107 yards. Michael Pittman Jr. had 6 catches for 58 yards himself. The question at this point throughout the week, this episode is late. I recognize that. Throughout the week, we're sort of talking about, you're listening to local radio, you're talking with people in the community, and sort of the vibe that I'm getting is that maybe it's time to implode. And the vibe that I'm getting is that there's a big three in every franchise, right? There's the general manager, there's the head coach, and there's the quarterback. And if you are hitting, if you are perfect, if you're effective in all three of those areas, if your general manager is building a good roster, if your head coach is using those players correctly, and if your quarterback is creating plays the way that they should be, your team's going to be good. Right? The Bills, for example, they have that. The Chiefs, they have that. They have a general manager that's building and sculpting a roster that is built to create success for your coach and quarterback. Andy Reid, Sean McDermott, right there, using those players correctly. And then their quarterbacks are playmakers, and they're incredible, right? Bills and the Chiefs, right away, top two teams in the AFC, they have all three of those things. The Chicago Bears, for example, are a team that maybe has one, right? Caleb Williams maybe is your quarterback, right? He probably is. But general manager, questionable. Head coach, very questionable as well. The Bears are a team that doesn't have, certainly doesn't have a majority of those three things. And that is why they are falling by the wayside. It's a way to take the temperature of a given team. The Bears are bad. They don't have a majority or all three of those things. Bills and the Chiefs are at the top of the AFC. They have all three. The question is it time to implode the Indianapolis Colts? Maybe. And we're going to talk a lot about this, especially as football seasons end. Indiana Notre Dame, one of their football seasons is going to end this Friday. We're looking at a perennially average team floating just under 10 wins, right? The Colts, I believe, had 9 wins last year. They'll probably have less than that, but they could still reach 9 this year. They're in purgatory, right? It's that area in the middle where you're perennially not a playoff team, but you're just underneath it, right? Somewhere between 6 and 9 wins. And the reason why that's so difficult year after year, if you're at the top, you're in the playoffs, you're in Super Bowl contention, you're at the very least in playoff contention, that's great. If you're at the bottom, that's obviously a worse spot to be in, but it's easier to get out of that because you have higher draft picks and the league is built to prop up the teams at the bottom to keep it at an even playing field. The Colts, again, are going to be in the middle, right? 15th pick, 14th pick in the draft. They aren't able to do very much with that necessarily. And ever since we picked Anthony Richardson, we've been in the middle, right? Right there in purgatory. And it seems like we're stuck there. So the way that teams get out of that is by complete factory resetting. And that's a very difficult decision to make because there's a lot of quality talent. There's a lot of good things. There's a lot of good on the Colts, right? They have a roster talent that is good. It had a lot of hype coming into the year. You look at the receiving room is a great example. Michael Pittman Jr., A.D. Mitchell, Josh Downs, Alec Pierce. There's a lot of quality roster talent on this team. There's a lot of quality ground, like a foundation, right? The foundation of the Colts is very good. It's just that they haven't been able to expand upon that in years. Haven't had a division title in years. The Texans have won 6, the Jaguars have won 2, the Titans have won 2, the Colts have won 0 division titles in the last decade. And that's a great example where there's a very good foundation. There's stars on this team. There is good roster talent. They're just not able to do anything with it, and that's because of general manager, head coach, Quarterback, is it one of them? Is it two of them? Is it all three? Is it none of them? Can we just roll into the next year without making any changes? These are the questions that we're going to have to be answering over the course of the offseason. I'm going to go through each one of those 3 points. I'm going to talk about what they struggled with during this game against the Broncos, because again, the Broncos exposed all 3 of these areas for the Colts and plenty more in this last game. I want to talk about each of the 3, and then I want to talk about whether or not they should make a change, they being the Indianapolis Colts. We'll start with head coach Shane Steichen. He's coming in, right? It's a fresh start for the Colts, recently hired head coach, offensive coordinator for the Eagles, made Jalen Hurts what he is. Steichen's incredible. Offensive, great mind. This is his first head coaching stint, and that is important to keep in mind here. The coaching problems I noticed in this game, the number one thing that comes to mind for me is what in the world was that trick play? And what I'm talking about is with 10 minutes left to go in the game at the Broncos' 40-yard line, the Colts on it was second down, something along those lines, down by 4, right? Approaching field goal range if they weren't in it already. And there's that horrifying trick play where Anthony Richardson pitches it out to A.D. Mitchell. You think it's a screen pass, and then A.D. Mitchell for a second hitches his feet, and you think that he's throwing deep. Then he turns his hips, looks back at Anthony Richardson, goes to throw it back, and it's intercepted by Benito and taken all the way back for a touchdown. That now makes that a moment where you're down by 4 with the ball to now down by 11 with the ball with 10 minutes left to go. And at that point, the Colts were demoralized, and at that point, the game slipped away from them entirely. That trick play, in my opinion, was completely unnecessary. In that moment, you're down by 4 with 10 minutes to go at the opposing team's 40-yard line, and the offense was finally moving. You had to have gotten to the 40-yard line somehow, right? The offensive was finally churning. It felt like Anthony Richardson was able to hit some key throws. Jonathan Taylor was picking up some big third and long opportunities around the outside too. And we see this interception that's technically listed as a fumble recovery that completely appalled me. And I was watching the game back in preparation for this episode, so I'm going back through, and I almost forgot how bad it was. And so I'm sitting here alone in my home. There's no one around me, and I audibly gasped because it was bad. And I feel like that in that moment was completely unnecessary. And I want to be careful, because I don't want to be the person that looks back on a play and reacts to it knowing the result, right? You could make the argument that if this had worked and it was a touchdown, we would be having a completely different conversation about it, and that's very true. And that's the thing with Dan Campbell a lot of time with the Lions, is you say, well, depending on the reaction to the play call depends on the results. And when the play call was made, of course, the coach and the players did not know what the result would be. It's just that I don't think this risk in this moment within the context of the game was necessary. Even if this drive stalls and you kick a field goal, that's perfectly fine. Now you're down by 1. Now the Broncos at best can make it an 8-point game, most likely. You're still within 1 score, right? Absolutely, the Colts would have an opportunity to stay in that game with 10 minutes to go. And maybe you just pick up a first down with a traditional play and keep churning and score a touchdown and take the lead, all of those things. That was concerning to me. That in the game was a moment where when we have an offensive-minded head coach, it felt like there should be better decision-making in that moment within that context. The other thing is the lack of discipline, right? It feels like Steichen doesn't quite have the hands on the horns of this team, right? It doesn't seem like he has complete control. There was the whole Anthony Richardson debacle earlier in the year. Jonathan Taylor dropping the ball at the goal line is perhaps the most devastating and embarrassing thing I've seen from the Indianapolis Colts in a long time. The Tyler Gibson drop was what it was last year. It's just unfortunate. It's tragic. It's horrible. I hope we never go through that again. It was devastating, but that's just a play that didn't go our way, right? This was awful because the play did go our way, and Jonathan Taylor was nearly in the end zone, and he dropped the ball right at the goal line. I don't know how that kind of thing is still happening. I don't know how especially Jonathan Taylor, a veteran, a multiple-time Pro Bowler, arguably the best player on this team, right, outside of maybe Quentin Nelson. Jonathan Taylor in that moment should not be dropping the ball at the goal line, and he did, and that's unfortunate. That's terrible. We could have gone up 2 scores. Instead, and sure, we picked off the pass on the ensuing drive, but that's an opportunity where we never scored again, right? We never got that close ever again, even with a field goal. Could have been up 20-7 over the Broncos on the road in the second half. Instead, we're still only up 1 score, and the Broncos found a way to make their way back into that one. That deflated the momentum for the Colts. It not only took points off the board, it deflated the momentum. It completely altered the vibe of the game, and the Broncos had an opportunity to completely take advantage of that, and the Colts really couldn't bounce back. That was something that I felt was concerning. And then just a loss of a sense of fight and urgency late in this game as the Broncos began to pull away. Really, ever since that pick six and that trick play I was talking about before, it felt like the Colts were giving up, and it felt like the season was over after that interception. Once the Broncos went up by 11, it truly felt like the season was over. And that sense of fight and that sense of urgency for a team that's fighting for their playoff lives and their season lives, it just wasn't there, right? And that is something that, again, I feel like at the end of the day falls on coaching. The one counter argument to that is that he is very offensively intelligent, right? Incredible offensive coordinator, and is supposed to be good with young quarterbacks because of what we saw him do with Jalen Hurts. He could use some more time, and maybe with more time, maybe with a better quarterback, maybe with a different general manager, maybe Steichen in an environment that's more conducive to his strong points, to his fortes. Maybe he's able to make something happen from there. We just haven't seen that yet, and I'm interested to see if really what the Colts do. I doubt they'll get rid of Steichen at this moment after just these 2 years, right? But regardless, he's going to need a change in environment around him, whether it's a different young quarterback to work with, whether it's a different quarterback to work with in general, whether it ends up being Joe Flacco where they pull someone else out from the outside, or whether it is a different general manager, some different roster talent. The Colts are going to have to make changes moving into next year. We thought in the last offseason that they could just move from a year that really doesn't count, right? Anthony Richardson was hurt the whole year. We were playing with Gardner Minshew. We still were on the doorstep of the playoffs, thinking, okay, we can just reset, we can reload, we can refresh, we can take that team, we can copy and paste it into this team, make a couple changes, bring in Joe Flacco, right, and do it again, and it went worse. And that is concerning, of course. It's concerning that when Anthony Richardson was playing the majority of the year, the team was worse. Everything about this season is concerning, and changes now for sure have to be made. We already tried staying stagnant, right? We tried making no changes from one year to the next, and it didn't work. Now something needs to change. I doubt Steichen will be what is changed, but something is going to have to be altered around him in order for him to do his job better, in order for the Colts to be better as a whole. Quarterback, Anthony Richardson, right? He had 2 interceptions in this game. The first one, there was pressure in his face, and he just missed on a 50-50 ball to Pierce. It would have been incredible. It would have been a highlight if that pass was completed. He was just a little bit too strong. That one was picked off over Pierce's head. I don't hate that one from a young quarterback. I think it's fine. I think that he handled the situation under pressure well. He put a pretty decent ball up in the air. I think if that's Michael Pittman Jr. he's throwing to, it's a completion. It was Alec Pierce. Ball is picked off. Broncos take it the other way. That's an issue. That's a problem. But it's an acceptable interception in that game, especially knowing that Bo Nix had 3 himself. The Colts, on the other one, Anthony Richardson made a horrific decision down the left sideline. There were 2 Broncos in the area. It was a bad decision and a bad throw. Sometimes you see bad decisions turn into interceptions. Still a good throw, just not a throw you should be making. Other times you see a great decision, just a horrible ball. This one I feel like was both, and that was a bad interception in a moment where we could not handle another turnover. Balls turned over, and the Broncos effectively sealed the game off of that one from there. First interception, a little bit more acceptable. 1 bad interception in the second half that very much concerned me. That's what we saw from Anthony Richardson. He's been struggling in big moments. He's unreliable. He has some great moments late in games. He won us the game against the Jets. He won us the game against the Patriots, right? But this time, against the Broncos, against a quality opponent, notice the Jets and the Patriots combined have less than 8 wins, right? The Broncos had 8 wins when we played them, so a team better than the last 2 teams we played combined in terms of record. He shrunk, right? He didn't show up, and this is a Broncos team that's not one of the best in the league. Yes, they're going to go to the playoffs. I think they looked very legit, and I think the Broncos look great, and I think they're going to be a real flash in the pan of the playoffs, could win 1 or 2 playoff games, and I'm not just saying that because they beat my team, right? I think the Broncos are awesome. But Anthony Richardson, in big moments against good teams, has just been unreliable, and he's been unsuccessful across the board. He was recently drafted, right? Recent draft capital and also ticket sales. So those are the 2 things that we really want to keep Anthony Richardson for. He is mobile. He is someone that is sort of a dual threat quarterback, and if we can improve his ability to throw the football, potentially his life in the league could be much more preserved. We just drafted him, and we used a top 5 pick on him, right? It would really hurt to have to just give up and effectively give away that pick and that capital. And the other thing is ticket sales. And the other thing is passion and investment in the team. We saw what happened when Joe Flacco came in for Anthony Richardson earlier on in the year. everyone freaked out and everyone brought science to the game, right? Everyone's talking about it. We need a free AR. We need to free Anthony Richardson. We need to bring him back into the saddle for the Indianapolis Colts after that debacle where he sat out for a play in a big moment. Again, big moment, unreliable Anthony Richardson. If we bring in another veteran quarterback, if we bring in another Phillip Rivers, or if we bring in another Matt Ryan or Carson Wentz, right? If we do that again, whether it's Joe Flacco or anybody else, and sure, Joe Flacco is a better thrower of the football, and I think he elevates this roster better than Anthony Richardson does. It's just better, of course, to invest in your young quarterback who is going to be your future, rather than have another 2-year stint, 1-year stint with another fading, aging quarterback. When you have a roster talent as successful as this one, if we were to do that again, bring in Joe Flacco or bring back Joe Flacco or bring in another quarterback from somewhere else that's on his way out of the league, what does that do to the fan base? How does that make the fan base react to say, okay, now for a 6th, 7th year in a row, outside of the Anthony Richardson period, we're going to have to watch another aging and fading quarterback play and probably not have that much success and bring another team to a 9-8 season. There's a lot of risk to keeping Anthony Richardson around, and there's a lot of risk, and I would argue more risk, to giving him up. So that's going to be the question too, because similar to Steichen, Anthony Richardson is very young in the league. This is just his second year, his first year where he's played the majority of the games. He's very young in the league. He was a very recent draft pick. I don't think that we're going to give up Anthony Richardson. I don't think we're going to move away from him. Maybe we start the year with Joe Flacco next year. That's the extent of what I could see happening. And that's fascinating because, again, we're talking about how we need to make a change. We're talking about how something needs to be different about the Indianapolis Colts. Steichen is new and still has a lot of promise. Richardson is new and still has a lot of promise. I don't expect us to make a change in either. So the third member of that big three, right, the third leg of this chair is general manager. And that's Chris Ballard, who now he's been, 10 years in the league, something along those lines. He's certainly had enough time to turn the Colts around and make them a team that is worthy of contending for playoff spots and Super Bowl championships even. And the narrative around the general manager and Chris Ballard at this point is the fact that he's wasting talent. He's wasting players in their prime years. And this is always something that we talk about with teams that have bad coaches or bad quarterbacks. It's look at the talent around your quarterback and head coach that you're wasting, right? Michael Pittman Jr.'s prime years were in them, right? Michael Pittman Jr. has been on this team for the entire duration of the time. Michael Pittman Jr. could be an incredible player in the playoffs. He is the guy. We saw that win against the Ravens last year where he had that helmet catch. Michael Pittman Jr. is the guy that you look for in the playoffs, in Super Bowls. He can be that quality level of a receiver. We just haven't put a quarterback with him and put a team around him that's able to succeed at that level, right? So Michael Pittman Jr.'s prime years, they're being wasted. All of the young receivers in their youngest years in the league, you look at A.D. Mitchell, you look at Josh Downs, you look at Alec Pierce, their prime years are being wasted. Quentin Nelson, he's going to have to retire at some point. Jonathan Taylor, especially with how short the lifespan of running backs is in the National Football League, his prime years are being wasted as well. You see Zaire Franklin, you see Kenny Moore on the defense, right? A lot of players in their prime years of the NFL, their bodies are in tip-top physical shape, the best that they're going to be in, and we don't have good enough quarterback play. We're not coaching the team well enough. We don't have enough, we're not performing at a high enough level to sort of live up to the roster talent that we may have across the board, and that's resulting in our poor seasons and our poor records and our, again, missing of the playoffs, and then not having any hope of winning a Super Bowl or even getting close. General manager, from that perspective, we're wasting talent. Does a change need to be made there? Is that worth it at this time? I don't know. We'll have to talk about it. Same thing with head coach and quarterback. Both are young. Both are new to the team. Is it time to make a change in either of those? I doubt it. But something's going to have to change, and something's going to have to change fast because, again, this team has plenty of roster talent. They have the opportunity to be successful across the board. The Steelers are a great example, right? The Steelers have had their coach. They had been average. They were making the playoffs as a 7 seed. They'd been average forever. Finally, Ben Roethlisberger, he falls off towards the end of the career. And towards the end of his career, rather, he retires. Kenny Pickett comes in. He's not very good. Have a period of time with Mason Rudolph, right? And then they bring in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. They fix their issue. They fix quarterback. And look at them now. They're going to go to the playoffs, and they're probably going to have an opportunity to win at least one game and potentially are an outside contender to win a Super Bowl. Colts need to do something like that. They have the roster talent to be successful. Sure, there's holes in this team. They're going to fill them with the draft and free agency. But also, between head coach, general manager, and quarterback, Something needs to be changed. They're in an intense form of purgatory. They're stuck in the middle. Every decision feels wrong. That's why it's so difficult. If you keep Anthony Richardson, it feels like you're setting up your team for failure once again, or at least a lackluster season. And if you move away from Anthony Richardson, it feels like you're going back to old ways that we know don't work, of just putting in another aging and fading quarterback in the saddle and just hoping for the best. Coach, again, Steichen, there's a lot of upside. There's a lot of promise to Steichen. Moving away from him would be concerning, but again, every decision feels wrong. Everything that the Colts could do will feel wrong until it works. And now for another year in a row, it hasn't been working. The Colts are in a bad spot. They're in purgatory, and I look forward to the moment when they finally get out.